Good evening, everyone. Actually, I don't know what time it is where you live. Good evening, and welcome to another fine episode of Woodworking is Bullshit. I'm your host, Paul Jasper, scientist by day, woodworker by night, and I'm joined by my two amazing co-hosts, Eric Curtis, a full-time content creator and furniture maker, and Mary Tisai, which is not how you pronounce her last name, AI designer by day,
Good.
contemporary woodworker, finally, now that your shop's set up, by night.
Hell yeah. Are you planning on mispronouncing my last name every episode?
I'm thinking it'll continue until it gets old, but it hasn't gotten old yet.
I feel like we there's so many variations. There's Mari, Tisai, Marie.
Coda Marie.
Yes, because Mary is such a hard name.
There's a lot of different, iterations of Mary.
All right. So, aside from how to pronounce Mary's name and her business, this is the first episode of a new concept that we decided to try. It was Eric's idea.
Wow.
It's the first
so nervous that it's going to fail. You're already throwing me under the bus.
That's right. It's Eric's idea, so it sucks. Blame Eric.
It's going to be great, guys. This is going to be the best fucking episode we've done yet.
So we're going to call this, it's a recurring series, and we're going to call it the Master Series, the furniture that shaped America. And our goals with this series are honestly threefold. We want to learn about the major forms of furniture and why did they become so popular? Of course, that's, I think what a lot of us are interested in. But we do want to cover their origins and philosophy as a way to understand their design language. If you don't understand the origins, the pieces themselves and why they look the way they do may not make sense. And then once we figure that out, we then want to turn to discussing and debating this as a community. Do we find this story or philosophy compelling? Would we build furniture in this style? Why or why not? Or could we actually improve or riff upon these styles of furniture? So seeing as we're almost to the 4th of July, we thought that maybe we could start today with one of the most influential American furniture styles, the Shakers.
Hashtag Murica.
So with that, what we're going to do to cover the Shakers is first, we're going to introduce a bit of the history of how the Shakers came to be in America, a bit of their religious ideology, and that will actually segue into naturally why their furniture looks the way it does, and more discussions about the furniture itself and the style. So I'd like to start with a quote from Thomas Merton. The peculiar grace of a Shaker chair is due to the fact that it was made by someone capable of believing that an angel might come and sit on it.
Angel's ass, huh?
Angel ass was my favorite party drug in college, actually.
Okay.
Good.
So this is a rough start. As I implied, though, as that quote implies, the Shakers were a Christian organization that came to America. They were actually called the United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Appearing. And the phrase that is used often to represent them is hands to work and hearts to God. All right. And I'd like to give another quote that I thought was particularly from one of the elders of the Shaker religion that I think kind of in a nutshell tells us like where their head's at. Are you free as you are? Are you in any degree bound by your appetites, your passions, your self-will? Are you at all in bondage to the opinion of your neighbors, to the customs and notions of society, however harmful or absurd? These do not trammel the true Shaker. Eldris Anna White. Okay, so I think that right there says it's about like Christianity and sort of avoiding, many of the influences of society around us in a more pure and clean version of Christianity. Now, why were they called Shakers? They called themselves the United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Appearing. Well, they were called Shakers because of their ecstatic dancing that they would do. They were ordinary people who gave up literally everything to be part of this religious sect. They gave up their homes, their families, their livelihoods to practice this simple version of Christianity.
I do, if I may interrupt, just to give some context to it. This is the intersection of my love and passion for furniture and my degree in religion and philosophy. The Shakers were, for those of you who know anything about the Quaker religion, they were essentially an offshoot of Quakerism, and they were, if you will, kind of an amalgamation of evangelicalism with Quakerism. So they took the ideals of Quakerism, simplicity, oneness with God, and separation to an extent, and combine that with, I don't want to use the word outlandish, but it's the only word coming to mind right now, very vibrant worship practices. And that's where that name Quaker or Shaker comes from, is they were originally known as the Shaking Quakers.
So it wasn't a similarity of the two, of enjoying natural I'm trying to make some sort of joke. I'm trying to make some sort of joke of like it related to earthquakes, because there's earthquakes that shake. I don't know what's happening, but I'm just saying there's a relation there.
You nailed that one. That was so funny. It was so good.
God damn it.
All right, so
I'm the person who doesn't know anything about it, so I'm just saying.
Here for it.
All right. So coming back to the history, now that Mary's joke bombed. So Shakerism was founded by a woman, Anne Lee. So she was born in Manchester, England, to a family too poor to afford her any education. She was illiterate her entire life. She worked at a cotton factory, and at the age of 20, she shifted to a cook in an infirmary for the insane asylum. At 22, she joined a Quaker sect, which is like what Eric said, a group of religious, like a religious offshoot of Quakers, a small group, and they were called the Shaking Quakers, due to their similarities to the Quaker faith, but they also practiced cleansing of sin through chanting and dancing. And they believed that the second coming of Christ was going to happen soon, and God would return in the form of a woman. And they believed this Anne Lee was this woman. And later they received her, and they would call her mother due to this belief. She taught her followers that it's possible to obtain perfect holiness by giving up sexual relations, because she believed sex was the greatest sin of Adam and Eve. And
she
like her
predecessors, that was the original sin.
How did they reproduce?
Well, they didn't. The Quakers, we're jumping the gun here, but the Quakers weren't. It wasn't about reproducing within their culture. They would get members just through joining and conversion and adoption of orphans who needed it. And those orphans, if they were brought up in the Shaker religion, they could absolutely 100% leave when they became adults. Like, this was not, from what I can, and Eric, you can speak to this, this was not a seedy kind of gross, tendrils, take the children. It was actually more upfront and honest than I expected. It was more like, come as you will, we'll take you in. And if you would like to leave, please leave. And we do not discourage people who want to have children, because how else are we going to have future Shakers? It's just not our path. We think by having a vow of celibacy, we'll be closer to God.
The point of this podcast is not to dissect the theological, foundational beliefs of the Shakers. It's really interesting stuff for those of you who are into, theological ideations. But it's yes, they didn't, to my understanding, dissuade other people from having children. They did believe that sex was the original sin. They were celibate their entire life, and this is why the Shakers did die out eventually. And
Eric, wait.
There is one singular remaining Shaker community. Yes, that's true.
I have an update to that. I'm not sure that's why they died out. But okay, so what happened next? Okay, so Anne Lee began being persecuted in England and thrown in jail often. And she eventually decided, her and her little group of Quakers, shaking Quakers, we got to get the hell out of here. So, of course, just like every other religious sect, they sailed to America, right? So they sailed to America in 1774, right before the American Revolution. And as part of spreading her new word, she would travel on mission tours across New England, but was often met with fierce resistance in the form of angry mobs to her story. Like, who is this woman? Why is she trying to tell us that, there's this new form of Christianity we should follow? And many angry mobs attacked her. For instance, in Shirley, Massachusetts, which is not that far from me, I almost bought a house there. She was attacked by an angry mob because she converted a wife, stealing her away from her husband. The wife wanted to join the Shakers. And then later on in Petersham, Massachusetts, a crowd dragged her from the horse, threw her into a sleigh, tore her clothes off to see if she was actually a woman, and almost beat her to death. And to that, they reacted with nothing but pacifism. They were
that's
savagely
the Quaker side
abused,
of the theology. Yeah.
And they were put in prison. And shortly, about 2 years later, after she was, came back from the beating, prison, and what have you, she died. Now she was in America all of about 10 years total.
How old was she when she died? Do you know?
48.
Oh.
Okay. 10 years in America, spreading the word of her new idea about this new Christian faith, and she's dead. However, funny enough, that was 1784. Funny enough, over the next 60 years, the popularity of the Shakers grew and grew and grew until it reached its maximum in about 1850, where they had 6,000 members scattered among about 24 settlements around New England and even as far west as the Midwest. So the elders, upon her death, like put rules down and tried to continue, the Shaker faith to grow it even further. Okay, so that's more or less the story of the Shakers in a nutshell.
It's hard not to dive into like their belief in, Trinitarianism and how they feel about Mother Ann and everything else. But we don't need to get into that to understand their belief in furniture philosophy.
What I want to get to is some of the ideals that they had that relate to furniture. Okay. So first of all, they challenged almost every ideal of American society during their time here. They believed that in community ownership, pacifism, dancing and worship, equality of the sexes when there was none, equality of the races when there was none. They even took in a black man during their time here in America before racism was abolished, and they got beaten savagely again for taking in a black man and making him an equal among them. They believed that sorry, I wanted to go down to they believed that every act of work was in reverence to God. They aimed for absolute perfection in everything they did as a sign of their religious devotion. So it didn't matter if you were making chairs or feeding the ducks. Everything you do could be done to perfection as a form of worship. So work was worship with the Shakers and an act of piety. It was the practical side of religion. It provided a specific daily opportunity to serve God in every action they did. And they cared very much for what they did. The daily laborers aimed not for products or profits, but for perfection in what they did, because that perfection, as I said, was like a gift to God. And so all labor was consecrated, and even the most menial tasks were dignified towards the service of God. So let's take that for a minute. Like, I think right there you can see how well done their furniture is if you've seen Shaker furniture.
Do we want to dive into that right now?
I mean, why don't we start with that?
I think that's good. I think that's good. Yeah, because this isn't a theology podcast, and as much as I want to keep diving down that hole, we do need to bring it back to furniture design. That striving for perfection is very evident in their craftsmanship, in their design, all the way down to their choice of materials, right? There is this belief in Shaker furniture that veneering is lying. And this is a belief that comes up every 50 years or so. Like there's this idea that to veneer a piece is to be dishonest. They weren't the first and they weren't the last to believe that. But that choice of material, I think, is a really core component of their design aesthetic. It's simple objects. Form and function are equally as important, but form is minimalistic, and function is it leads them to make some really interesting design choices that I think now we look back on as like, oh, well, this is classic furniture. This is classic Americana. Let's take the shaker peg or the shaker drawer pull, for example. That kind of domed top that swoops down underneath. It's a very simple turned peg. And you see this all over shaker furniture. You see it up on the wall where they could hang their chairs to make sure that the house is tidy and sweep underneath. But this has become so prevalent. Like we don't even think about it as shaker pegs anymore. They're just, that's the shape of a peg. Or one of my personal favorites is because of their practical mindset. If you ever look at sewing tables that they made, often, not always, but often, you have the drawers on the left hand or the right hand side, depending on whether that person was lefty or righty, where the sewing machine would sit. And then to one side, there's usually one drawer or maybe two drawers just on the side of the table, which makes no sense. There's no reason to put a drawer there, except for the fact that you need a place to put all like your thimbles and whatnot. And so rather than bending down to a drawer on your right-hand side, you can just put one on the left-hand side of the thing and just pop it out and then pop it on the machine. And it's these things that you see, and then you see like Garrett Hack do that in a piece, and you're like, oh my God, that's so clever. How did he ever think? Well, he looked at a fucking sewing machine table from the Quakers and he went, that's cool. I'm going to do that. Yeah. It's just interesting how those design choices then become replicated through history. And then we see them as contemporary ideals when they have a basis 150 years ago.
So regarding their design choices, Eric, my research said that it was really about making their daily life and daily tasks easier and more efficient. They weren't like the Amish where they shunned technology or electricity. They weren't like that kind of a group.
No, they were very clever inventors.
Yes. So maybe we could talk about just for a minute, and then we'll come back to their furniture, some of their innovations that they came up with. So maybe you and I, let's go back and forth. I'll name one and you name one.
And we'll see. You got the list because I don't have the list in front of me.
Oh my God. I feel like I'm listening to...
So okay. All right.
Listen to two professors here.
My favorite is the circular saw. So yes. Tabitha something or other. She was fantastically brilliant, and she saw two men using a pit saw, I believe.
Yep,
and she realized that 50% of each of the person's motion was being wasted. Right, the return cut was not in use, and so she thought, well, that's stupid. We should just make something that uses 100% of the motion, and she invented the circular saw. Now you think, okay, that's wild. That's the circular saw. Think of how many tools you have that use a circular rotation to make a cut, because that's 95% of your workshop. She basically invented contemporary woodworking. And it's really interesting because then then it comes back to the idea of egalitarianism in Shaker philosophy. This woman made things out of wood and she went, I know a better way. And there was no hesitance to accept her idea because it was fucking brilliant. And now, then we have this idea of like, well, women shouldn't woodwork. That's stupid. Well, you know Absolutely what? Not. Literally a woman invented your woodworking shop. So maybe let's get over that.
That's wild.
The circular saw.
The circular
Son
saw.
Of a bitch.
And hey, you know what? So you take that and you turn it upside down, you nail it to the bottom of the table. Guess what you have? A table saw.
Wait, so how did the circular saw work in their time?
Go for it.
I actually know. So they eventually came around to the idea of using rivers and water current to turn a turbine.
It's so good. They
reinvented the turbine to make it more efficient, just from a water wheel to an actual turbine, and that would turn belts that turned all their machines.
Interesting.
So one of the most this is for anybody listening, but also Mary for you. One of the most fascinating places on the planet is Hancock Village. in upstate New York, which is not that far from you, Paul, honestly. It is the largest Shaker community. And there is this barn where it was a workshop on a river, and they have this belt driven system. So basically, they have a water wheel in the river and a bunch of stationary machines that are bolted to the floor, and all of these belts running through the floors, through the walls, and in the workshop. And all they had to do was to turn different levers to make different belts move, and it would turn on different machines.
Wow.
It's wild.
They were so innovative.
Yeah.
And it was all based on what works.
Yep.
What could save them time.
Yep. All right. So the circular saw.
Yep. Next up, my answer: cut wire nails.
It's a good.
They're in my house. Yep. I have cut wire nails in my house right now. I was like, they invented that? I had no idea. Your turn.
All right. My personal favorite is the flat broom. So before
Eric, why do you gotta take all like the best answers, dick?
So before the Shakers, brooms were made of broom straw, and they were round. They would just pile them up, lash them together, put them on a stick, sweep. And then the Shakers went, this is stupid. If it was flat, it would be way more efficient. And so they invented a vise to flatten those straws out and then sew them together and created the modern flat broom.
Which, by the way, that vise, I saw it. It looks just like the vise you put a saw in when you're doing sharpening saw teeth.
Yeah.
It looks just like it.
Yeah.
All right, my turn.
Go for it.
Clothespins.
That's a good. Ooh. It's a good.
They used to lash two pieces of wood together with a piece of metal back in the day, and the Shakers were like, "Why do you got to do that and like use all this metal and it comes apart? Let's just make a cut in between two, like one piece of wood to separate the two pins."
Clever.
What? They invented that?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
All right,
Eric, your turn, darling.
Here's a fun one I learned today, which I didn't know about. They invented, quote unquote, the tilting chair.
God damn it! That was my next answer.
That's such a good one. I just learned it today. All right,
what is that?
So everybody who sat in a chair will eventually at some point tilt up on the back legs and lean back, right? That's what we do naturally. And so their thought was, if you do that, you could either risk slipping or scratching up the floor, which would be ungodly. So they basically took a ball and peg, a ball and socket joint, and attached that to the bottom back legs of the chair, so that when you tilt up, the chair doesn't move. It's just rotating on that socket, which I'm like, that's so clever, because literally everybody does that.
Why don't we see that these days?
We do. In school, the kids' chairs
have the little pivots on the bottom. Yeah, okay.
Ooh, that's such a good pull. I didn't even think about
usually
that.
Metal, yeah.
Well, those legs are also canted so far back where they can't actually tilt, Interesting.
Okay.
All right, next up.
Well, you took all the popular ones.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Shaker pegs for hanging things around the room. So you know how a chair rail goes around the edge of a room? They would have a chair rail, but a bit higher, and would put shaker pegs, and they would hang literally everything, because cleanliness is close to godliness, right? They believed that there's no mess in heaven. And so cleaning was part of their daily ritual, and they would hang the chairs up, hang all kinds of things up on these pegs, which would take everything off the floor so they could sweep and clean the floor every night.
Okay, question. So I don't actually know why a chair rail is called a chair rail. I've always assumed that it's because it's around the height of the crest rail of a chair.
It's because if the chair, it prevents the chair from hitting and marring the wall.
Interesting. Okay. All right. That's good to know, because the chair rail that you speak of, they literally hung up, we'll call it 5 feet up off the wall, so that they could literally hang the chairs on the pegs in order to sweep. So I was wondering if
that's not really a chair rail.
It's not a chair rail. It's too tall.
No, it's like a peg rail.
Yeah, it's like coat rack height kind of situation. Yep. Okay. Let's see what else is on there. Another very popular item, which they definitely invented, but I don't know how familiar everybody is with it because it's not as ubiquitous anymore, is the oval box, the pantry box, right? So I think we've all seen this. It's basically a single piece of wood that's oval, and it has those, what they called, I believe, it's not dovetails, pigeon tails, something. They called it something like that.
Yeah.
Goose tails, I don't know, some other bird tails, but it's these long triangular, 3 usually long triangular pieces, and then they would basically rivet them together. And
what are they called?
Oval boxes, shaker oval boxes, or pantry boxes. And you've seen them. Google them right now.
Yes,
exactly.
Okay.
Any listener right now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, swallow. I was so close with pigeon tails. So yes.
Are they used for like hats and stuff?
No, they were pantry. They were pantry storage. So they would store like dry goods in there.
This was an improvement upon the previous iteration of boxes that existed, and the Shakers thought they could make them better. They thought that an oval would actually fit contents more, with less wasted space than the previous shapes.
So consider, it's a terrible design choice. No, it's not.
That's what they said. That's what they said.
But consider the fact that like most of their grains were coming in sacks, right? So if you could store a thing in a box, that you could stack that more easily than you could stack sacks.
Okay, that's I guess for like grains and stuff. But there's so much leftover space if you're putting in solid objects.
Well, it depends if they're square or not. To be fair,
that's true. How are these? I'm looking at photos. Were they like just veneer or something?
They were steamed. They were thick veneer.
They're a 1/16 of an inch thick. And they're steam bent.
Yeah.
And then they're riveted together.
Yeah.
And then after that is steam bent and riveted, the oval, then you trace that to the bottom and then you fit a bottom afterwards because the steam bending is so...
What's fascinating to me about these objects in particular is like, this is a thing that you can make so utilitarian, right? It could be so... There's no reason to do those swallowtails. There's no reason to rivet them. There's so many choices that they made that took a functional object and elevated it to, I don't quite know what it is because I'm trying to get in the mindset of like their religious ideology, but they took an everyday object that most people would overlook and they tried to make the thing as close to perfect as they possibly could.
They perfected
and
things.
And all of the troubling philosophies aside, like that is one of those things that resonates, I think, with us, with probably our listeners, of there is this thing that should be better and we can go do that better, profit be damned.
Okay.
It's an interesting mindset.
Eric, I have some interesting factoids about shaker oval boxes because that's probably what most everyone's familiar with. Number one, they made a lot of them. They started making them around 1799, so the beginning of the 19th century, 1800. And they made them through the 1800s. And for example, just from New Lebanon, Connecticut alone, which was one of the Shaker villages, they made 77,000 boxes.
So this is what's interesting to me about the Shaker community is like, we think of that time period as everything was handmade. And sure, it was because hands were on it at all times. But they were masters of production. And so this comes back to if I could marry for a second, what your definition of handmade is, because it is a real question to like contend with here, because they were making objects by hand, but they were using production techniques. And just because they didn't have a CNC, does it mean that it was handmade? Like where do you draw the line? Because
by production techniques, do you mean like using jigs and everything?
Yeah, they were mass produced 77,000 boxes. They were mass producing these.
Yeah, and that's how they survived. They paid taxes, by the way. They paid their taxes.
Yeah.
They weren't like, trying to skirt taxes or skirt their contribution to society. And the surplus that they didn't need, they sold.
Yeah.
And that came in the form of furniture and also, just as a very interesting thing, seeds, vegetable seeds. They were the first in America to sell vegetable seeds in paper packaging that they would print themselves. And they got orders in the millions because the Shakers were so honest and so upfront that the name Shaker became synonymous with quality. Good for them. That was pretty impressive.
It's interesting.
Speaking of quantity and production, in 1872, I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay. All right. Trivia time.
You have 10 workers in a factory, a Shaker mill, let's say, in 1872. 10 workers. How many chairs, how many shaker ladderback chairs could they produce per day? Now think about how difficult. Now, I'm not setting you up for some gigantic number because it's not. But think about how long it would take you to make a chair with like properly turned legs and all the the rungs and the chair back and the seat, and how many 10 people, how many chairs could they make in a day?
A few things off the jump. I don't think we mentioned that the Shakers invented the ladder back chair yet. I don't think we've said that this episode, have we?
Well, did they invent it or did they popularize it?
Well, that's a fair question. I'm not sure they invented it.
I've seen ladderback chairs from the Jacobean period in England far before the Shakers.
Fair. That's fair.
But the shaker ladderback chair is a thing.
Is a specific style of ladderback chair.
Correct.
Okay. So they did have a style that they produced in mass that we identify as the shaker ladderback chair.
And they used a cord for the seat, like shaker cord or something like that?
Yeah, similar to Danish cord.
It's like caning, kind of?
Yeah, it's very similar to caning.
So how many?
So
5,000.
No.
I told you it wasn't this girl. She can. All right, 10 workers in a factory. I'm assuming this is by the time it's up and running and parts are being pre-produced the days before. I'm going to say, 25.
Yes, Eric, 24. Holy shit.
Nailed it.
I was going to guess 22.
It's almost like I work in this industry.
Eric, how did you do that?
That was a guess?
That's amazing.
That feels right.
Yeah, in 1 year alone, in 1884, they made 3,000 chairs in one of their factories. So they were putting out a good number of...
For context, for people who have never made a chair, if somebody commissioned me to make 8 chairs for them, that's probably 4 months of work, realistically. No? Nobody disagrees with that statement?
I agree. That's why I don't. No, that's why I don't make chairs, because they're too difficult.
Yeah.
I did 2 chairs, and I will not make them again.
Also, not for nothing. The production of seating and the ergonomics of chair making are different. And if you've ever sat in a shaker chair, they're not very comfortable. The seat backs, because the seat backs are at 90 degrees to the seat.
Oh,
and exactly. So
but the point wasn't to be comfortable, right? It's to worship.
The point was to function. And one thing that they did do really well was low back chairs, which are a whole different ball game. But for those of you who aren't familiar with the ergonomic problems of chair making, the chair seat or the chair back for a dining chair tends to be at about 95 to 105 degrees from the seat. And if that's at 90 degrees, think of like an old English throne. It's not comfortable because you are forced to sit directly straight up, which nobody sits that way. So your butt then naturally slides and you're starting to sloop in a chair, and it's not a pleasant experience. So sitting in a shaker chair is basically, you feel like you're, for lack of a better analogy, being forced to sit directly straight up at church on Sunday. And you're just like, oh yeah.
So one of the quotes that really stuck with me about how the Shakers produced their furniture and produced everything they did in terms of work was, do all your work as if you had 1,000 years to live, and as you would if you knew you must die tomorrow.
Oh my God.
So, do it to your absolute perfection, as if time is forget time. Don't worry about time. Don't rush. But have a sense of urgency at the same time. Like, don't cut corners, but have a sense of urgency. And I think they're trying to balance those two ideals.
Those are kind of extremes.
Well, but we're also talking about religious foundational beliefs, which are, they are extremes.
Yeah, okay. I guess that's fair.
So question, Eric, Mary. Now that we've covered, why they came to America, what their goal was to be closer to Christ, and that work was a form of worship towards perfection. If you could do your work to perfection, it was a gift to God. It was your way to worship, honestly. And now you look at their pieces, and their pieces are as functional and pared down, because they also thought ornament was a distraction away from God, right? So there's no ornament. It's totally pared down to true, like the truest form of the thing, whatever the thing is. And they did it with the utmost precision and perfection using whatever tools they could, get. They weren't averse to technology. Okay, so given that that's the background of the Shakers, what have we learned from them, and what do you think that influence has done in American furniture design since the time of the Shakers?
Mary, I'm going to let you answer that because I have too many things to say.
I probably don't have enough to say. I mean, the question of form follows function is something that's repeated through lots of different styles, both in furniture, architecture, design, etc. So clearly that has very much shaped the way that different design styles are brought through the ages. Obviously simplicity and minimalism, something that I really enjoy and can relate to. Like, I also do not like much ornamentation, things like that, just personal preference. But the question that comes to mind when I think about and look through Shaker furniture is its very direct influence on other furniture styles, especially, things like even like Scandinavian design. And like, one of the questions I had for you guys is like, is it the same as Mission style? Because I can tell it's not quite, but it looks very related as well. So there's clearly a lot of influence there, and I'm sure Eric can speak to many of those.
Well, to answer your question in brief, and I feel like this is an entirely different episode, but it is different from Mission in that Mission is an offshoot of arts and crafts, and arts and crafts was an exploration of joinery as ornamentation, and ornamentation, as we've already discussed, was seen as an absolute negative in Shaker ideology.
There's a relationship, though.
There is a relationship. You can see they were different schools of thought, but you can see they came about in similar time periods, and you can see how they were dealing with the same core issues. But Shaker's influence on contemporary, we'll just keep it to America. I don't know how many international listeners we have, but I can speak to my experience as an American. You have things that you don't even think of. Let's just take Shaker cabinets, for example, right? If you get your kitchen redone and you get cabinets designed, one of the options that you will have is Shaker cabinet doors. And all that means is flat panels with flat rails and stiles. It is minimalist aesthetic. And it's a thing that they did so consistently that now having flat panel doors is seen, or even just like sometimes we say raised panel doors are Shaker aesthetic, even though sometimes they're named raised panels. So that's one thing. Their influence on form and function and minimalist aesthetic, like we use the term minimalist aesthetic now. That wasn't a thing that existed 150 years ago. And then they had this influence on this school named Bauhaus, which was a thing that happened in, what was it, 1920s, 30s Germany?
I think it was like 1919 or something like
1919. That. Okay. So post World War I Germany, we'll say. And they were, it's one of the foundational schools of philosophy of design in the 21st century. And that ideal of minimalism, of form over function, was one of their core philosophies. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mary.
Yes, that is correct. Simplicity and minimalism by far was one of their core philosophies, as well as form follows function and emphasis on materials, honest construction, a lot of overlap.
And so you can see the tie-in there. And many of those Bauhaus objects that came about are still ubiquitous in our life. Like and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe one of the most ubiquitous ones is the school chair. Like that blue plastic molded chair with metal legs that came out of Bauhaus. And every single one of us listening to this podcast has sat in one of those chairs.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, like, you can see the direct tie-in of the idea of honesty in material choice and how that from that school of philosophy ties back to the ideal of the Shakers of honesty of materials.
Yeah. Same with, like one of my favorite chairs ever, which is designed by Marcel Breuer, was the
coffee house chair.
Seska chair.
The coffee house chair.
Is that what you call it?
Yeah, the coffee house chair.
Coffee houses.
Yeah.
Are they? Well,
that's what they're named.
Real ones now.
Real designers call them the Cheska chair.
But it's like that, the one that has the cane seat, and then like the really simple curved metal. That like it's just such a brilliant form that Brewer did, and it was such. I think feel like that one in particular is such a direct influence from something from the shaker furniture style, because it really focuses on like function, minimalism, and just making sure it's like the most perfect chair, but also like in such an aesthetic way, which is my favorite.
All right, so if we are so enamored by the story of the Shakers, and I think the three of us have a healthy respect for what they've accomplished, regardless of philosophical religion, bases. The fact that anything labeled Shaker could be bought and sold with perfect confidence, right, in the quality of the product. Why did the Shakers go away? So I think, we should just for a moment, conclude the story, and then we'll move on to like some questions about Shaker design and would you use it in your own work. So
when did they go away?
So during the industrialization of America in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they couldn't, even though they were sort of the first, so like highest quality boutique kind of sellers of goods, and everyone knew it. Shaker everything was top shelf stuff, from what I understand. Even with that, the industrialization of America offered the same, or not the same, fairly similar goods, not as good, but for far cheaper. And they couldn't compete with the industrialization of America. And furthermore, like industrialization, mass production, the Shakers just couldn't compete with it, even though they had a superior quality. And on top of that, on top of the economic losses, the new America that was evolving enticed the young men to leave because of all the socioeconomic opportunities. The vow of celibacy didn't age well with a lot of the young men.
That doesn't sell well.
and women, for that matter.
Yeah. And how dare you?
and they wanted to explore the world, so they were seeing a decline in their money coming in, and they were seeing a decline in the numbers of people joining through the late half of the 1800s, to the point that it dwindled and dwindled and dwindled until today, where there are 2 or 3 surviving Shakers at one single site in Maine called Sabbath Day. Mm-hmm. And there are 2 or 3 remaining Shakers. They will accept new members. I checked as of this morning. There's a long list of things you have to do to be a Shaker. And it's
totally... What's on the list?
Mary, it's like you have to denounce like your life to God. You have to give up all your worldly possessions. You have to take a vow of celibacy. Like
no more raves in Germany, Mary. I don't think
no more
raves
in Germany.
Hey,
all the things that Mother Mary Lee espoused from the beginning. If you do all those things and you have a 5-year residency to try it before they even decide if you could be a new member. But they're not particularly against new members, but it's just very few people have the wherewithal to go through that process.
So when you say 2 or 3 Shakers, that's like 2 or 3 people?
2 or 3 people exist in the world today. In the last,
I thought you meant like different sex.
No. In the last Shaker run, and you can join them for worship on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. I'm so intrigued by all this. I almost want to go.
You want to go?
Oh my God! Can we do a podcast field trip?
Oh.
Wait, podcast field trip.
Too late. We're already doing it.
I am so intrigued by all of this. I kind of want to go.
I will say I've been to many a Quaker worship, and they are delightful. I've never been to a Shaker worship. I don't know.
Well, to give them credit, most utopian religious sects last less than 10 years.
Sure.
And the Shakers are by far the most successful religious utopian society, lasting over 2 centuries now in the history of the United States. So you got to give them like props.
Are they going to die out though? Very soon?
Yeah. It depends if new people join or not.
Okay, but before we get too far, listen, we are going on a podcast field trip. That's settled. But I want to go back to your question about the industrialization of America and kind of Shaker being synonymous, the name Shaker being synonymous with quality and trust. So the parallel that I want to draw is during Prohibition. The quality of alcohol that one could get at a speakeasy was wildly variant. And nowadays we think of name brands as being overpriced and like, you know, you're just paying for bullshit. Like there's no reason to buy a name brand, which is fair. But during the Prohibition, if you got the wrong whiskey from the wrong dude, you were going to go blind because welcome to moonshine.
Methanol.
Yes. And so if you bought a name brand, if you bought I don't know what name brands were going on during the Prohibition, but let's just say Jack Daniels. If you bought Jack Daniels, you knew at least you weren't going to go blind. And so name brands had this air of not necessarily like quality to an extent, but also safety. You knew that your investment was okay and that bad things weren't going to happen. So again, take yourself back another 50 years before that to 1870s America, 1880s America, and you have to go out and buy a piece of furniture. You know how much goddamn money you have to spend on a piece of furniture? People complain about the price of handmade furniture now, and that's fair. I'm not knocking that. But everything you bought at that point in time was handmade. It cost a lot of money, and this is why people repaired things rather than bought new things. And so if you went and you found a piece of furniture that was Shaker, it had that same promise of quality and lasting that, say, buying a bottle of Jack Daniels during the Prohibition. I know Jack Daniels didn't exist during the Prohibition. That's not the point. But it had that same promise of your investment is not going to go to waste and you're not getting scammed because you know that it's Shaker built.
Right.
That doesn't mean
the name brand.
That doesn't mean that it's perfect. That doesn't mean that it's perfect, because if you ever look at an original Shaker piece, it's replete with tear out, and blowout on corners and like things. Things were it is because things were handmade. It's still difficult to make objects, but the thing would function as you needed it to function.
It's
and
reliable.
That's the quality that we're talking about.
So it's kind of like how people talk about Amish furniture these days.
Yeah.
Like not many people buy them, but anyone who's like, oh yeah, I bought Amish furniture, I know it's going to be reliable at least. It's just not the style that a lot of people like.
Yeah. So, I really resonate with that idea of like reputation, quality, the best you can do. And while I'm not particularly religious, and they were doing it for religious reasons, and that was the fire in their belly that made them do things so well, like I think there's an opportunity for all of us who make things to have the same fire in our belly about making something that lasts the test of time, that whoever buys it will have it for centuries and can refinish it and can repair it. And I think that's independent of religion. But I love that whole premise.
But this is the hard thing that I always struggle to articulate too, because I wouldn't label myself as religious or Christian at this point in time, but I did come up in that philosophy. And so there is this ideal of like, it's that philosophy is not uniquely Shaker. Like I draw that philosophy from the Eastern Orthodox tradition, but there's this idea of striving toward perfection, and perfection in and of itself in the Eastern and Shaker philosophies, like that is godliness, right? Like you can achieve perfection on earth by striving to be more godly.
See, Eric, I reinterpret that not in terms of godliness, but in terms of humanism. If you care about your fellow human and you care about their experience while they're alive on this rock, make them something that brings daily joy to them.
I agree with you 100%. And this is the thing that becomes a struggle to articulate then, is because like godliness is a beautiful term that as soon as I say godliness, you at least know what I'm striving for.
I do.
But when you don't then believe in God or the Western religions, then when you say humanism, people are like, all right, well, like there's no ideal there, but it is an ideal. It is an ideal. It is. And I think you're exactly right in articulating what you just did.
Whether you believe in God or whether you believe in the goodness of humans or whatever you believe, the point is having a belief in something motivates good work because you're doing it with a purpose in mind. I think that's the point. You're not doing it for profit. You're not doing it to make a buck. Look, money is here today, gone tomorrow. Fuck that. Like, of course we need money to live, but beyond, covering your bases, I do not want to spend my time chasing a dollar because that is fleeting. I want to do it for the purpose of making other humans happy and, improving their life in some way, in some tiny way, right? And the point many philosophers feel is you don't get good furniture and good design without some philosophical underpinning that you believe in. And it doesn't matter what it is exactly, but it's just having that underpinning.
I would agree with that 100%.
Okay. So, no, given all that, I'm so interested in Shaker stuff right now. We could do this for another
fucking hour right now.
Oh my God. I want to make Shaker boxes. Like, I want to explore this shit so bad. I'm absolutely inspired by this whole thing.
We are going on that field trip.
We are going on a field trip.
Oh my God. 10 a.m. on a Sunday. Who's going to Maine with me?
Let's go, baby. Where in Maine is it?
It's Sabbath Day, Maine. Right? Did I get that right?
Where's Sabbath Day, Maine?
I don't know.
How far north is that?
I don't know. Google that.
We're going to find out right
Mary,
now.
Google it. You Google faster than all of us.
She really does.
Okay. Now, given all that, given everything you've heard about their ingenuity, their inventiveness, and their passion, right? Would you make a Shaker-inspired object?
That's a hard one.
Sorry, I was distracted by looking up Sabbath Day.
It looks like it's maybe an hour north of Portland, by the way. We're absolutely going.
Their buildings are so interesting. Oh my God. Look at how many windows there are.
Hey, focus on the podcast.
The question is, Mary, Jesus Christ. The question is, given this newfound appreciation for what the Shakers did to furniture design and what they're all about, would you either make a Shaker object like Christian Becksford, or would you, or Eric, or would you evolve would you riff off the Shaker style and evolve it into your own lexicon?
That's what I was gonna say. Like, I don't know if I'd do a direct copy of a Shaker. I mean, maybe it'd be nice to do it once to like practice, but I feel like it would be more interesting to do your own take on a version of a Shaker piece of furniture. Like, I definitely relate to them in terms of the simplicity, minimalism, like very clean lines. But I would want to put like my own twist on it. Why do you disagree, Eric?
I think your curves table is pretty damn close to a Shaker piece. Now, it's not a Shaker piece because it's not simple in every aspect, right? You are adding ornamentation in line and form. But if you were to strip that of color, like I think the one you made was black, correct? The one with the like the ovular cutouts.
I've done both black and natural.
Okay, the most recent one you did was black.
Yeah.
So let's take the natural one, for example. I don't think that's that far away from a Shaker ideal.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think I would do something in the Shaker inspiration, but put my own perspective on it. And I think
that's what we all do. Like, you're not just going to make Shaker furniture.
Well, isn't that the question? Isn't that what Paul asked? Like making a direct copy?
Both, yeah. Well, would you make a direct copy, or would you rather evolve it into your own design language?
I would rather evolve into my own design language, I think.
I think the honest answer is all three of us would take the design philosophy and evolve it and implement that. And I think I do that constantly. I think my core design philosophies are essentially Shaker philosophies. Like, they are.
I could definitely see that.
Function is equally as important as form. That honesty of material. Now, listen, I don't disagree with veneering as a principle. I think veneering, to throw veneering out is to not understand that some woods are highly valuable and difficult to come by, and to yield more footage out of them, square footage out of them, is a wise thing to do. I think that's good shepherding, if you will. But I take those core identities and I implement them in most of my work, like not caring how long a thing takes me because the object is the principal concern. I think would very much align with Shaker philosophies.
I'm with you on that. Like, you got to give the piece what it needs. We talk about this almost all the time.
Yeah.
You got to give the piece what it needs, because like the money is short lived, the profit is short lived, but the piece lasts centuries. Do you want to be proud of that piece? Give it what it needs and stop cutting corners.
Wait, but I'm curious, Paul, what your answer to the question is, because you have a lot of ornamentation.
I know.
So I'm really
Could you do something plain?
That.
Ooh, that would be an interesting challenge. I don't know. How would you challenge? Like,
okay, so I do not at all believe that ornamentation is evil. Okay? Like let's just, as a biologist, if you look at flora and you look at plants and flowers, they're rife with ornamentation, tendrils and colors, and every beautiful shape and Fibonacci patterns. Like, I mean, come on, ornamentation is literally everywhere on this earth. To say that that's not godly, and I don't give a shit about that, because I'm as atheist as they come. But from my own point of view, I think ornamentation is beautiful, and I might argue it speaks to humans, because humans innately love certain ornamentation. Mary, I remember you were in a library at UPenn a few months ago.
Yeah, the Frank Furness one.
You're as minimalist modern as they come, and you were oohing and ahhing over the ornamentation you saw there, because it touches you in a way that's like, fuck, that's so beautiful, right? So yeah. How can we deny ornamentation from this conversation? I think that's, the lack of ornamentation was part of the extremism perpetuated by Mother Ann Lee about no sex, no ornamentation, no this, no that. Like, I understand, like, she was going for the most pared down version of Christianity she could imagine, and she was having visions and all this shit. That's fine. Like, I absolutely accept that for you, but I don't think that's for me, and I don't think that's for most of humans.
Yeah, I would not counteract that, but maybe add on to it to consider the beauty and simplicity in contrast, or in conjunction with something that's ornamental, like nature and floral and flowers. I feel like putting those two next to each other just emphasizes how beautiful one is, and I think that it makes sense to have that philosophy of simplicity and natural, emphasizing nature and keeping things clean, to emphasize how beautiful these other things can be. So I agree with you, like, ornamentation is not evil, obviously, but I think that it is potentially more emphasized when put in comparison to
you have
these
to
other
do
values.
It tastefully. Yeah. And Eric, I don't know how you feel, but Mary's last piece of the Hobbit door was quite ornamental.
Eric, you're muted.
For someone, Eric got muted.
I've been muted this whole time. I've been out here oohing and ahhing on all the things that you guys have been saying. I've been literally like, that's so good. Well, anyway, I just want to call how technology works. Like, it's fine.
We're gonna call her Minimal Mary from now on. Minimal Mary's not been so minimal lately.
She hasn't. There's a lot of things I got to say about that, but we're gonna save that for the after show.
Okay, all right. So, do I expect you guys to? And let's wrap this up. We're at roughly an hour. Should I expect to see something Shaker inspired from the two of you in the next 6 months to a year?
I would love to take a moment and reinterpret the oval box.
Me too.
I would love that. I have an idea about boxes for 2025, and I may have to add the oval box to the list.
Wow.
Eric, while I was looking up oval boxes, and every parameter of how to make one.
Is this our collab?
I want to make one so bad. Okay.
Is this our collab?
Wait.
Okay, all right, fine.
There was one oval box that came out, and it was a Shaker box. And it was not an oval. And I'm going to give you both one guess what the shape was.
A circle.
Wait, what?
There was not an oval. Shaker box that I stumbled across, that was
oh my
not
Christ,
an
it was
oval.
a Stadia.
It was
a fucking Stadia box. You son of a bitch.
It was. It was two perfect semicircles joined by straight lines. It's one of the only examples in existence from the shaker tradition, and it's from the 1850s. And I was like, my God, it's a Stadia box.
It's an innate form. It's an innate form in humanity.
I want to make one of those so bad.
Is that not an oval?
It's not. It's a stadium. Okay. Enough of that. Okay.
All right. Well, onward and upward.
Well, we shall see about our field trip to a Sunday worship service in Maine.
This is not what I expected, but I'm all for it.
If the listeners want to come, you just contact us and we can put a day together.
Oh wow, we're making this a whole listenership situation. You know,
all right, Eric looks very uncomfortable. Eric looks very uncomfortable.
Let's lean in. Let's get like 50 people to go descend upon these two elderly men in Maine and just be like, "What's good, Playboy? What's poppin'?"
I like how other podcasts has like, "Oh yeah, let's meet up and drink some beers," you know, like.
And we're like, "Let's meet up. Let's meet up and go to a worship service.
Let's go check out the shakers, the two remaining shakers on this earth." Okay. All right. Wow.
It's perfect.
That was a lot.
From three pretty non-religious people, you know.
It's going to be great. It's going to be amazing.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you're all invited. It depends on Eric, how Eric's feeling that
you
day.
Guys, everybody's invited. Let's roll. Let's ride. I'm going to put this out on Instagram. It's going to be great.
So we're going to pivot to our next segment, which is going to be a short one. And we decided to do reviews of each other's work. All right. And it's not shaker work. It could be anything, right?
Speaking of that Hobbit house.
And as opposed to like reviewing our own work, we're going to review each other's work. So I'll review Eric. Eric will review Mary, a piece that he likes or doesn't like. And he's going to shit all over Mary. Mary. Sorry, Mary. And Mary's going to review me, which is kind of ironic because she hates ornamentation and that's all I do. So we'll see how this goes.
So what are we calling this?
Round robin reviews.
Paul Revere's ride. All right.
I
don't know.
Who would like to start?
Rib Rab Rush.
All right, I'll start.
Go for it.
Because the two of you are fucking too drunk to focus.
Mary is so drunk right now.
Mary is stone cold sober, but Eric and I. Okay, so to begin, all right, I'm reviewing a piece by Eric. Eric, the first piece of yours that jumps into my mind instantly when we said we're going to review each other's piece. Do you know what it is?
I don't.
Guess. Can I guess?
Yeah, sure.
Is it the violin cabinet?
Yes.
Because that's my favorite too.
Eric.
Okay. All right.
That violin cabinet was so fucking good. It made me a little bit angry, a little bit upset, and a lot like proud of you. It was awesome. I mean, the way it cinched in the waist.
That was my favorite part of it.
It had this like flow to it, and each slat, not only did the slats move like from like an hourglass shape, but the slats themselves were concave, as I remember.
Yeah.
It was,
I like
and
the color for sure.
It was painted white. it was stained white. It was so tasteful, so like sophisticated, so beautiful, but understated. It wasn't like trying to be beautiful. It just was. I loved it. And when you saw the violin in it and you saw the doors open with those beautiful brass like pins, I mean, dude, it was flawless. It's my favorite piece.
I appreciate that, buddy. I think the thing that made that work was for those of you who haven't seen it, you should look at my friend Kristen, and I will find her handle before the end of the episode because I don't remember it off the top. Kristen Siegfried. Siegfried Violence. Siegfried Violence. She's an incredible luthier. She's absolutely brilliant. And she commissioned me to make that piece. And I think what works really well is the whole point of that cabinet was to display the planchette. And
which is what, Eric?
Which is the tiniest playable full-scale violin that exists. It's 1/16th scale, and it still plays like a full-size violin. It is, it's wild. But
How have I not played one before? That's wild.
Get Kristen to bring it down. You should play it. But it's a brilliant piece, and that whole idea was to display that object that she made. So I was really happy that the two could, I think, stand alone, and then when they came together, it felt really special.
It was great. It's just like it's instantly what I think of as one of your finest pieces. It was brilliant. Not that you don't have other great pieces, you do. I love your whiskey cabinets. I love a lot of the things you make, but that one was like woof.
Thanks, buddy.
Funny story about Kristen. This is crazy. I didn't tell you this.
Uh-oh.
Okay. I had a former work colleague named Thomas, good friend of mine. Still to this day, he doesn't work with me anymore, but he's a good friend of mine, scientist. Okay. Thomas, and he's got 2 kids. His kids were like making friends at school, and he met this cool luthier named Kristen by chance, and their kids would always play together. And she's like, oh, what do you do? She's like, I'm a luthier. And he's like, oh, I've learned some woodworking. I have a really close friend who taught me woodworking or sort of got me into it. His name's Paul. Maybe I don't know if you've heard of him. And Kristen's like, Copper Pig Paul? And Thomas is like, I used to work with him. What do you know him? And she's like, yeah, of course I know him. And then both Thomas and Kristen came to my design talk when I gave it in last month.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And I got to meet Kristen face to face. It was really
Kristen is the fucking coolest. She's
very
so cool.
It was such a nice little weird happenstance. Like the world is it feels so big, but then other times it feels so small. Something like that can happen.
Our world is very small.
Have you guys ever made any like luthier things or taken any classes?
No,
I always wanted to.
I did pyrography on a viola for Christopher Jacobi.
What?
Did you see that? I did. Yeah, we put all like the ribs around the entire viola is like my hand drawn pyrography, and across the back. And Chris made a very non-conventional viola.
Wow.
That we worked on together. I'll send it to you, Mary. I'll send you pictures.
Okay. You're a bad son of a bitch.
Okay, Eric, you're up.
All right. This is a multi-step process right here, because the first thing I do want to bring up is the Hobbit door.
I love the Hobbit door
for a number of reasons. Number one, the Hobbit door in and of itself as an object makes me smile such a deep smile because it's so silly and playful and useless. And that is so against your philosophy. I can feel the tension in you in making that, and yet I know it wasn't contentious at all because of your deep love for the Hobbit. And then you also have this thing of a square compartment with a round door, and there's just so many, the ornamentation, the coloring, and then you put your fucking face in the reel. There's so many elements of you doing something that's outside of what you feel safe doing, that it literally made me, not only is the object so wonderful, it made me so proud as your friend to see you do this thing and then put it out in the world and be like, this is what I fucking made. I don't give a shit if you like it or not.
Mary,
it
was awesome.
It's so good.
It was my way of, because I've been out of woodworking for so long, it was my way of making myself fall back in love with woodworking. So
but those are the objects that are brilliant, right? Those are the things, it's so clearly, I don't know how well the audience knows you. I know you as your friend, as this super fucking nerd who loves The Hobbit and this deep love for this tale that I also love, in fairness. And then you make this object that's so perfect for it, and the content that you make around it is so dissonant with the other content that you've made. It made me so happy. It made me so happy.
Mary, if I could comment, that was a joyful project.
Yes, and it's so clear. Yeah. It's so clear. So that's one of them. I was proud of you for that. The other one that immediately jumped to mind, and I don't know how you're going to feel about this, but the French curve that you made is so obnoxiously perfect. It is.
It's so big.
I know. Listen, I know it's a French curve. It's the design parameters were there for you, but it wasn't just the curve itself. It was the way that you created the curve and presented the curve, and it was perfect. And it felt like there is this I mean, in striving for perfection, right? We often, I think you among the three of us strive for perfection the most. And perfection, I don't know if everybody knows this, is fucking hard to achieve. Like it's a real high bar to clear.
Tell that to the Shakers, though.
Well, I think even they would acknowledge that perfection is difficult to achieve. I think the striving toward perfection is what the thing is that matters. And every now and again, you accidentally achieve it in the stupidest of objects. And I think that's exactly what you did with that French curve. Like it's so very perfect. Good. It's such a delight.
Very good.
It's very satisfying to hold and use. I mean, I don't have it anymore, but
you don't have it anymore?
It was a commission for a friend who wanted it for like a professional artist. Okay. And they're like, we just want a big ass French curve. I was like, okay. So I made it. I was like, well, I feel like something this nice should really have a case, even though they didn't ask for a case. So like, I just made a whole other case.
Mary,
like, how else am I going to
see? That's
Mary. Did you give the object what it needed?
Yes.
Yeah.
You did.
Exactly.
That's exactly, and it comes through so clearly in that. It's just this. I don't know. It's perfect. It's
good
perfect.
for you, Mary.
Aww,
that's all I got.
Wow. Dang, we should do this segment for often. Okay. I got one for Paul.
All right, go for it.
Okay, so my favorite is, I think by far, the skull box thing. Because especially the one, I forget, I know you did multiple, wait, sorry, let me pull it up. The one that has like the curly cues all around it. I think it because I love old school scientific drawings, and that reminds me so much of that. And I feel like that
interesting
definitely calls to like the science part of yourself. Maybe it was unintentional, but for me, like the style of that is just so much like like the old posters that I used to have.
I get it.
Well,
I get it.
I guess people, not everyone always had those posters, but. And like I just love that style of drawing. I always wanted to get like a tattoo of it, of like floral or like, you know, botanical fauna, things like that. So I think that the skull is probably my favorite piece, and the ornamentation around it emphasizes it.
So you talk.
I think that it would have been weird to not have the ornamentation. So
you're talking about the box with the carved rim around it with the floral hieroglyphy around the skull, correct?
Yes.
It's a beautiful piece.
Yeah. So I love the shading in like the eye sockets and everything. That I think that is my favorite.
All right, so I have to say, like first and foremost, my friend Elena Simonova is the one who made the skull itself. Like she is a world-class marquetry expert.
She's really phenomenal.
Who lives in Moscow, Russia. And her and I collaborated on these. So she did the skull and I did all of the floral. I drew the floral work on my iPad and I pyrographied it and shaded it. And together we've been making these skull themed objects. And I'll be honest, similar to the Shakers getting a lot of shit for what they believed, I believe skulls are not particularly morbid. I think about death almost every day. It's a natural part of life, and that helps me prioritize what I do with my time. I think skulls are provocative and compelling and cool, and I put them on a lot of pieces, as you can tell.
Yeah.
And so even though I've had some people really assault me verbally about why would you why would you put such disgusting imagery on such a beautiful box? You've ruined it completely. Like even though I hear shit like that, I don't care, because art should ruffle feathers if you're doing it right. And Elena and I, man, I love Elena. Her work is spectacular, and I love collaborating with her marquetry. And the skull is an example of that. So you know me, I love interacting with people. I'm an extrovert. I find the process of making things more enjoyable when you do it together with someone else. So Elena and I, we're the skull. We're Team Skull.
What I love that. What I really love about this piece is knowing you and knowing that philosophy about you is that idea of, I don't give a shit if people like this or not. I don't give a shit if people are upset about this. This is the thing I feel I need to make. and I found this person who's incredible at making this marquetry around skulls in particular, and I'm gonna fucking do it. And I'm gonna highlight this thing that I'm interested in.
I love
like
it.
That more than art should ruffle feathers, art should be, in my opinion, a representation of where the artist is at a given moment. And I think that's what you do really well here. You are very clearly saying, like, this skull is the thing I'm sitting with in this moment. And if you don't like it, get fucked, because I'm going to highlight the shit out of it.
Yeah. It speaks to my inner emo child.
Well,
for sure.
I'll have you know that I'm making a huge William and Mary inspired valuables box with a gigantic skull on the lid. And I asked, I'm friends with Lee Kino from the Antiques Roadshow. And I asked Lee Kino the other day, I said, Lee, do you know any buyers who would want this? And it's inspired off an original valuables chest that sold for $2.1 million. Okay. At Christie's. There was the Simon's shop, valuables cabinet, William and Mary period. It sold for ridiculous money. And so, and Lee lost he was the second bid. He didn't win it. He was the second bid for his customer. And so I figured if there's anyone who could appreciate this chest, because the design is based off the original, but I skewed it with the skull and some other ornamentation. I said, Lee, do you imagine any of your customers would want this? Because if he doesn't have the customer for this, I don't know. And he said, well, Paul, as you might appreciate, he goes, a lot of my customer base is getting up in years, and the idea that there's a skull on the lid would only function to remind them of their impending mortality. He's like, so I don't think my customer base is exactly appropriate for this piece, but if I think of anyone, I'll let you know.
That is hilarious.
That was the most academic way of saying, nah, dog.
All right. Well, kids, I hope you enjoyed our round robin review of each other's furniture. And I hope you found the review of the Shakers' ideology, their immense contributions to innovation and furniture in America that is even beyond America. It procreated into the world. I hope you found that discussion interesting and compelling. And I definitely want to explore Shaker forms now as part of my own design language. I am so inspired by this whole story. I hope you enjoyed our first episode of the Master series of reviewing types and very influential forms of furniture in America. We'd like to continue that with some other forms.
Now nobody's trying to cast blame on me out here for bringing up this concept.
Eric.
I think that worked, buddy.
At first,
I was like, suggestions, by the way, for other artists.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, great. Okay. So with that, we're just going to thank our two patrons over the last few weeks. That's Catherine Dodd, and Aaron Reesner. Thank you both.
Hey, Ron. Thanks, guys.
And
thank you.
I don't want to just thank the new patrons. I want to thank the people who have continued to support us, right?
Absolutely.
It's not just joining, it's the continued support. Again, Absolutely. It pays for our hosting, it paid for some of our sound upgrades, and we really appreciate
for Mary's hair and makeup, so that's big.
More like your hair and makeup, excuse me. Mr. Two TV shows, I have my own trailer.
Man, I don't have a trailer for this podcast yet, but we're going to get there.
All right. This is our longest show ever, an hour and 18 minutes.
Let's wrap this shit up. What are we doing in the after show?
In the after show, we're going to cover and this was a user submitted question. Several users asked for this. They said, please tell us about a design fuck up or a design challenge that you encountered that really hit you hard, and how did you overcome it? I think so many people hit the wall in a project that's such a common occurrence. And to hear other stories about how they overcame it or didn't, or pivoted or changed, or, to hear that, not only it just makes it more approachable, makes them feel like, oh, wow, I'm not alone here. So that's what we're going to be covering in the after show. And if you'd like to join and hear the after show, just be a patron of ours. All right.
Thanks, friends.
Bye.
Make good decisions.
Bye.
Deuces.